Thank you, everybody, for joining this session. Let me introduce you the speaker, Jaspreet Dua. Jaspreet is also founder of his own venture company, and also he's been the global startup mentor for 500 Global, and also entrepreneur in residence. So I leave it to Jaspreet to his a quick introduction before starting this presentation. Okay, over to you, Jaspreet. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Hi, guys, and a good afternoon to all of you from Singapore. My name is Jaspreet Dua, or JD, as Julie mentioned. I run a fund called 1469 Ventures in the UK, which is a family office stroke M&A advisory firm. And I also work as an EIR with 500 Global. 500 Global was my first investor and my first startup ever. So I am a four-time founder. I have 3 exits. I've been in the corporate space for about 15 or 16 years now. And I live and breathe innovation. I do go-to-market. I worked in go-to-market positions for some of the biggest names in the world. And I'm here to essentially talk to you a little bit about a very practical way of doing market analysis and building a successful business model. Now, you may have seen some of these things that I show you. You may not have seen some of these things that I show you, but I'm going to try and tell you on how a startup founder, especially in today's world, needs to constantly reinvent themselves, needs to constantly experiment, constantly keep working on just refining or redefining what a business model is and should be. So let me start by saying, and let me begin by telling you guys that 9 out of 10 products fail. I specifically cut out the word startup because startups never fail. The products do, right? You evolve what you do as a startup, you change your product, you tweak your product, but they survive in some way or the other. 66% will drastically change their original plans. I'm not sure how where you guys are in your life stage, in your life journey at the moment, but I can assure you that a majority of you will definitely change the plan that you started off with when you started off your company, whether it's because of VC pressure, whether it's because of customer pressure, or whatever it is. So what we're talking about is not a better plan A, but we're talking about a path to a plan that works, right? So what we're saying is, what do you do to get from where you are today to where you want to be, the steps in between, and not necessarily your ultimate plan. That's what we're going to talk about, right? That sort of includes things like, how do you assess market? How do you look at your product? How do you create solutions? And I'll give you a very simple tool to help you do that. So let me also introduce you to something called a lean startup. Now, a lean startup is a systematic process for iterating from plan A to a plan that works before really running out of resources. That simply means you get to where you want to be before you run out of money. I know it sounds a little counterproductive now, where most startup founders think that let's just raise money and we will survive from one funding cycle to another, but that's not the ideal way of doing things. You need to have enough strength, you need to have enough substance in your product to survive without external funding. So what we're talking about is a plan that works, which is basically what it means is it needs to be scalable, it needs to be repeatable, and it needs to have some sort of business model. And that's where the PMF, or the product market fit, comes in. That's the first thing that matters. Now, market analysis as a topic is a very big component of the product market fit, right? The key to winning, or to find your product market fit, as I mentioned before, is to ensure that your product is market ready before you run out of money. That's it, right? And how do you do that, right? You document your planning, which is that one plan that you started off with. You tackle the riskiest parts first, and you maximize for speed, for learning, and for focus. So let's break this down and let's say, what do you mean by documenting your plan A? Well, um, as a theory, reasonably smart people can rationalize anything, but entrepreneurs are exceptionally gifted at this, right? And now that I sit on the other side as a VC, I always meet entrepreneurs who are so passionate about what they're trying to build that their whole world revolves around them. But when it comes to looking at it from a venture capitalist perspective, I look at it and say, well, this idea has been done and dusted in multiple markets, failed plenty of times, and it will not work. But because you, as an entrepreneur, revolve only around that idea, it's very easy for your mind to kind of rationalize and say, well, it'll work. So the right way, or at least that's what experts say is the right way to do this, is to essentially, first of all, distinguish between a business model and a business plan. Now, a business plan is typically a document that investors want you to write, right? But they don't really read it. And let's be honest, they don't read it. A business model, on the other hand, is a single business diagram or a single diagram based on your business. And I'll explain that in a little while. Let me pause here for just 1 minute to get your understanding. You guys are not on camera. I can't see what you're doing. Are you understanding me so far? Do you want me to go faster, slower, be more clearer? I'd love to hear from you before I proceed.
I think its speed is good. Thanks for
Okay,
asking,
all right.
Jaspreet.
All right. So I'll just continue then. All right. So this is called a business model canvas. Um, Again, not sure how many of you have ever seen this, used this, but essentially what this capsulates is your entire idea. Now, look at the sections. It breaks your idea down into a problem, which is the top 3 problems you're trying to solve, the solution, which are the top 3 current features that you're trying to feature in your idea, the key matrices, which is basically the key activities that you will measure to kind of ensure that your idea or your solution is working or not, your unique value proposition, your unfair advantage, something that can't be copied by other people, the channels that you want to pass on this idea to customers to, the customer segments, which is essentially your target customers, your cost structure, which is what is going to be your cost, and then your revenue streams. Now, if you notice, there's a line in the middle, and that line essentially splits it into half, which is product and market. You need to have a complete understanding of your product and your market before you move on to successfully launch a product. Okay, this is where the initial part of business modeling and market analysis comes in. You look at it from this perspective. Your product is not the product. Okay, your product, which is there, as I pointed out there, is actually a solution. Okay, it's a solution. Now, when I say solution is because solutions can be different. You have different solutions to carry out or to solve the same problem. That's why all of us exist. Now, if you come to me and say, well, I'm the only one in the world who's doing this, that's probably bullshit, because it's just not possible. It's not possible that nobody else in the world has thought about this. And from a VC, when you hear something like that, that's an immediate red flag when we look and we hear an entrepreneur's pitch, right? So your product is not the product. Your product is a solution. Please think about that. Now, when you think about it as a solution, you have to think about all the other ways that other solutions exist to solve the same problem that you're trying to solve, and then see how are you really different? So your business model as a whole is the actual product. Okay, because yes, you have the solution, but how are you doing it? How are you going to essentially complete this entire circle of a business model? That's your product. Are you going to do it cheaper? Are you going to do it faster? Have you found a niche customer base that is currently untapped for? Do you have an unfair advantage where which others do not have at present? Do you have a unique channel that you can send it across to consumers, right? So the whole business model is actually a product, and that's what makes one company different than another company. It's the entire business model. It's not really a product. I'll give you a quick example. Look at Tesla, for instance. Okay, what do you think can be Tesla's business model? The product is an EV. Many companies make EVs, right? Almost all companies have some sort of EV model, but that's not their product. Their product is the entire business model. They say, well, we are going to reach out customers through this. Our unfair advantage is so XYZ. Yes, in Asia we only have a car showroom, but if you go to the US, a Tesla store has solar panels, a Tesla store has battery packs, a Tesla store has a lot of other things as well. So that entire business model is their product. Somebody sent a comment in Korean. Could I request you to please type it in English? Or Julie, could you translate it for me, please?
Oh, this says that this session is being recorded and to be
Oh,
shared later.
no, this is CYY. That's they also made another comment right now. So
Okay, so he recommended actually turn off the cameras for the rest of people except the speaker.
okay.
Yeah,
All
thank
right,
you.
okay. All right. So moving along. So when you brainstorm multiple models and when you prioritize where to start, that is where you create different models. And that's essentially what we talk about in market analysis. Market analysis as a English language definition is basically going into the market and analyzing various scenarios, right? So you're analyzing po possible solutions that are similar to yours. You're analyzing possible customer segments. Who are those customers that you are trying to target? You are analyzing pricing. How much are those customers that you want to target willing to pay to buy your product, right? There are multiple various patterns. Now, think about it for a second. Go back to the table that I shared with you. Over time, you will have a situation where you are changing things in that table, which is your your business model canvas, to create various possibilities. So you're talking about the customer pain level, you're talking about ease of reach, you're talking about price and gross margin, you're talking about market size, so on and so forth. You will have multiple combinations of data that you will start to get. You need to prioritize where to start. And one of the first things that you do when it comes to prioritizing is basically tackling the riskiest parts first. Now, what do I mean by the riskiest part? Right? You have to identify what is the most riskiest part of your business model. So for that, understand the 3 stages of a startup. Say stage 1 says product market fit, stage 2 product market fit, and stage 3 scale. Let's break it down in this side. Okay. Do I have a problem worth solving? That's the first stage. Okay. Have I built something people want? That's the second stage. They both constitute PMF or product market fit. And third is, how do I accelerate growth, which is the scaling part. When you focus on validated learning, right, you experiment, you turn to pivot, right? You look at more qualitative data than quantitative data. When I say qualitative, which means data that is more relevant to you and data that makes sense for you to tweak your product, tweak your offering in a certain way that you fit a certain niche, right? You then tend to focus on growth, You then experiment on how do you optimize the product to accelerate that growth. And then you look at more quantitative data, which means how can I get this product out to as many people as possible, right? So in your PMF stage, which is your stage 1 and your stage 2, you are thinking from a very qualitative perspective. You want quality. When it comes to scale, that's when you shift towards getting quantity. How do I get this to as many people as I possibly can? So now you need to focus on the right macro metrics to ensure that you're doing it right. What do I mean by that? Now, certain key metrics when it comes to doing any sort of analysis are acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral, right? Those are the key matrices for any good product, which means how do users find you? Do users have a great first experience? Do users come back? How do you make money? And do users tell other users, right? So this is essentially the broad key matrices for any and every company. Now, before product market fit, you look at something that's called as value matrices, which is basically your activation and your retention, right? Those are your value matrices, which means are people having a good first experience? Is your product simple enough for people to use, or is it too complicated? Can they use all the features of your product as you intended your product to be used, or do you need to set up a separate customer success team which trains them, right? So this is where that thought process is coming in. Do I need to have a onboarding training happening, or can we just give this product out to a customer and they will use it because it's that simple and that straightforward? The retention part is essentially checking on whether your users come back to users or not. Now, as a founder, even I'm guilty of this, right? But as a VC, I can tell you this metrics is something sometimes overlooked. VCs do not care about your number of downloads. Okay, we don't. We do not care about how many people are sitting on your wait list. We just don't. What we care about is how much do the users use your product, number one, and do they come back to use it a second, third, fourth, fifth time? Okay. So what we do care about is the average, let's say as an example, the average time spent per user per login of a app as an example. Okay. And what we would care about is, do I keep opening that app up on a daily or a weekly basis to access some information, and does my time that I spend on your app stay the same or does it increase, right? That's what they care about. So that's your value matrix. You then look at your growth matrices. Now, your growth matrices are acquisition, which is how do you acquire new user, how much money you're going to spend on acquiring new users, are they generic acquisitions, are they paid acquirers, what is it? And then your referral. Now, again, a popular misconception is, let me throw money at this and let me acquire users, okay? The problem here is, yes, you can pay money to acquire users, but if you do not have a good retention, your graph, which is your growth graph, becomes flat, which means you are getting in new users, but old users are falling down. So your total users stay flat. Referral is a tactic that is essentially taking the most loyal of users and asking them to bring in people that they think can also benefit from your product as these guys have benefited. So your acquisition and referral in terms of your market analysis needs to be very, very clear, right? How do you acquire the first users, and how do you ensure that these first users are so thrilled about your product that they go and talk about your product to other people and they bring in other users? All this is happening, but what you need to remember and not forget is that you need to maximize for speed, for learning, and for focus. So if you look at this chart, right, you look at learning, you look at building, and you look at measuring, three things. And then you have idea, data, and code. Okay. As a founder, you need to have the speed, which is basically taking it from code to measure it to the data crunching part, to learning with what is coming out of it, to focusing on the ideas that you want to essentially focus on, and then building the same product all over again, right? Now, this is what is called as the optimal learning route. So you have the speed, you have the learning, you have the focus. You need to ensure that you do not run out of resource, which is basically your focus and learning should not take a long time where you run out of money. That overlap is you running out of money. You need to have the speed and the focus, but you can't be so focused on your ideas and the speed that you keep chasing your tail, which means you keep going around in circles, right? But you can't even have the learning and the speed, because then you have something called premature optimization, which is basically saying you have either developed something that is too advanced for the market and you're not going in line with what you are seeing the market or your ideal customer needs. So the small triangle, which is right here, this is called the optimal learning group, which means it's a fine balance between speed, learning, and focus. Now, I'm going to pause here for 5 minutes for Q&A. When it comes to market analysis, let me ask you, and this is a question for all of you, so please answer, and you can turn on your cameras if you want to. How are you focusing on launching your product? Are you folks? So there are two ways essentially that a founder launches a product, right? One way is that you have a technical founder, and that founder is essentially designing the product based on his skills or his skill set, which is called a product centric mindset. The other way is you have a founder which is first going out in the market, talking to customers, or based on that person's previous job, he has found a particular problem that he feels is still untapped, and he wants to design a solution around that problem, which is essentially called a customer centric mindset. So I want to pause here and I'm going to ask you this. What are you designing your company as? Are you designing it as a product-centric company or a customer-centric company?
Okay, let me jump in here. Is anyone wanted to answer to Jasper's questions? Otherwise, Jasper, I just can I recommend you just to keep going
Okay.
with the slide, please?
Okay.
Thank
Sure.
you.
Sure. All right. Sure. Okay. Okay. So think about this. I'm happy to entertain these questions because I will prove you wrong in some way or form, right? But let's move on. So why that is important is because you need to formulate what is called false falsifiable hypothesis, which basically means something that you think was correct, but is actually wrong. Because the way you're thinking, in your mind, it's correct, right? You are thinking that, yes, this product is needed. These are the features that are needed. These are the target customers that are needed. Sure, everything is fine. But it is still a hypothesis until it's proven correct. And more often than not, it will turn out to be false. So think about it, right? If you're too vague, if you're too broad based in your thinking, you're you risk being known as an expert who will drive early adapters, right? So you need to be slightly more specific. Say, well, I need a blog post as an example that will drive 100 early signups week on week. What we're talking about here is tools of essentially doing the right kind of analysis. So you have that little idea, you have the business plan, you're writing various things down, you're writing the solutions, you're writing the channels. How do you quantify that, right? Everything is about quantifying it so that you can essentially get rid of all false hypotheses, right? You need to quantify it to be absolutely crisp and concise as possible. You need to be what is called an architect for learning, right? What does that mean? So as an example, this is an old website called Posturus. And when Posturus came about, Posturus said it's a place to post everything, right? Just email us and we will post it for you, right? We will have these things ready and you can post it. So something to the effect of what Instagram is today or what X is today, right? This is going back in the day. So you have a acquisition, which you say, I'm bringing in new customers. The new customers are essentially coming into a landing page. Landing page is basically telling the uh, acquisition customer on why he should care, right? Yes, you could link it to your website, but you have a specific landing page, which is basically talking um, about very, very specific things that this specific acquisition person can care. Now, let me pause here. So when you do market analysis, you in marketing terms, you have certain things called experiments, right? You can have A/B experimenting. You can have various kinds of experiments that you can do to essentially see what works versus what doesn't work. And one of those ideas is creating different landing pages for different people. Now, each landing page looks different, feels different, has different kind of information. And what you are doing in the background is that you're constantly learning on the behavior of your specific target customer. So if you acquire a customer, somebody clicks on a link which talks about your product, goes to a landing page. How do I respond to landing page A versus landing page B? All this is part of market analysis, right? All this is you looking at which market will respond to my product in which way. As another example, if you look at Korean companies or Japanese companies, and if you look at their landing pages, generally speaking, those pages are often cluttered, right? You have tickers, you have scrollers, you have bright colors, you have things flashing, and you have multiple information on one page, right? That's typically the way information is processed or is produced to a customer in those two countries. If you flip that around and if you say you go to Europe with that page, the European customer will not take kindly to that. They will find it cluttered and they will turn it off. They want a much more clean interface. They want as white background black text, or a black background white text, simple text, simple information, simple clickable links, and that's it, right? So this is where your analysis comes in. This is where your business model, you need to create those hypotheses and say, okay, I'm prioritizing customers in Japan and Korea, then I will prioritize customers in the US, then in Singapore, then in this. For that, I need to change my acquisition, I need to change my landing page, and I need to tweak it to certain levels, right? So that is what you are learning. That is what you're constantly quantifying. That is what you're trying to constantly understand as fast as you can to ensure that you're attracting the right customer. I hope that's clear. Now, when it comes to acquisition, also what is important is how transparent you are in terms of providing information. So you've attracted me as a customer. I've come to your landing page. What other pages do you have a link to, right? About us. Can I read about your company? Can I look at, the product, etc.? Are you transparent about your pricing? Can I get to know what pricing it is? And how simple is it for me to actually click on a sign up and get started to use your product, right? These are things that you need to look at in the initial analysis phase when you're developing your business model. I'll give you an example. There is a startup in I think it is out of India, not mistaken, and these guys created a software which is in line with the likes of Visible and other such VC softwares which talk about investments into companies. Now, this company, it's called Traction. This company gives you a free use of some really funny 90 or 180 instances. Now, it doesn't tell you enough, but I figured out that when they talk about instances, it essentially means how many times am I clicking with my mouse on their screen, and they essentially remove the time based on that. So if I don't click on the mouse, if I generate one report and I just sit on it, it basically the timer doesn't work. Quite strange. What's even more strange is if I click on the trial button to sign up to use this product, I don't get any pricing information. What I do get is an email from one of their salespeople saying, we would like to talk to you and demonstrate to you about the product. They say that. In the email, they say you can find out about our pricing options here. When you click on that link, it just goes to the product. There is no pricing option. And I find it very surprising because as a user of softwares like this, I find it extremely frustrating as to why they can't be transparent enough to tell me how much it's going to cost me. I don't care about how the product is used. I want to understand what you're charging me, and then I want to look at it saying whether this product is cheaper than what I have or not, right? Had they done their market analysis beforehand, they would have probably spoken to VCs who would have given them this sort of an information. Clearly, that analysis part is missing. So it's an interesting product, but basic analysis, basic business modeling is just completely missing. And it's very, very baffling to me. So when you do a landing page, when you do a good landing page, right, you need to ensure that you give the right kind of information on that landing page for the right kind of customer. And you can't have the right kind of customer until and unless you have done the research on who really needs your product. Everybody does not need your product, right? There's always this little gap about saying Spotify, Tidal, Apple Music, three products that are very popular, three products that have very, very different pricing strategy. Who are these products for? Now, Apple Music does not let you keep any songs without without subscribing. Spotify will let you at least have a playlist, but it does not let you download the songs on Spotify. Tidal does not let you do anything. These are all music apps for information. They all have different ways of looking at their customer base, right? How many of you have ever heard of Tidal? I don't think too many of you would have. Tidal is a very, very high resolution audio streaming platform. It only uh, streams songs in extremely high res formats. But yeah, whatever. Right. So analysis, doing the right kind of analysis, doing the right kind of getting the right kind of data and essentially creating those hypotheses before you go and launch a product in the market is very, very important. Pricing, as I said, is extremely important. If you have a product that's a SaaS-based product, especially, how transparent are you with those pricing? Are you giving your prospective customers the right kind of information at the right time? Or are you simply keeping them frustrated? Now, remember, it's highly, highly unlikely that you will come up with a very unique product that has never, ever been presented to anyone before, right? You will come up with a product which is unique in its own way, which does things slightly faster, slightly cheaper, in a much more fun manner, with a better UI, and so on and so forth. The differentiating factor, it would be pricing and would be the convenience, right? Do you offer me better convenience, and are you competitively priced? Now, it doesn't have to be very, very cheap. It can still be the same price, but if it offers me the convenience, I would switch to you. But that being said, if you're not transparent in your offerings, if you're not transparent in those offerings to the right kind of customer that you have decided on, you will basically, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to steal, in the lack of a better word, you're trying to steal a customer from who's using another product to come and use your product, right? So he's already happy. I'm happy using the other product. I don't need to shift to your product, but I'm looking at it because I got, let's say, a email from you. So if you haven't done this hypothesis, if you haven't done this analysis in terms of what is my pain point, what do I really need, and can you give me information to squarely tackle this pain point, which in this case could either be pricing or could be the features or could be the convenience, etc. I would just lose interest and say, well, I'm very happy doing what it is. Why should I even bother? Right? Because why does anyone bother changing? So, so please be very, very mindful of this, right? If you are doing this sort of analysis, if you are doing this this kind of creating these hypotheses before actually launching your product, and you're learning constantly from the feedback and not sitting on it, you are more likely to launch a much more successful and a stable product, in not just in terms of the product build but also the customer base, than if you were not to, right? And that's the whole crux of this matter. You need to do this with speed. You can't keep sitting on it. You can't say that, well, I'm going to wait for a month to see what happens. As a startup, that's launching a new product, a month is far too long. Can you move faster? Can you move faster? So if you look at that same stage, right, the product market fit and this, break it down into requirements, into development, into quality assurance, and the release. Yes, you have some learning that you happen with the requirements, which is what you're learning, but you have very little learning that happens between the development and the quality assurance part. Most of your learning happens and will happen only once you release the product, right? So you need to release it to somebody who's not your team, to come back to you and say, well, I like this, but I would prefer if it showed me why, if it showed me why in such and such color, or such and such, such and such manner, or so on and so forth, right? So your learning will happen with that. So essentially what we're talking about is shortening your cycle time. And from requirements, you are shortening your quality assurance and your your uh, your development, which is here, your development and your QA, and you're saying, I want to build into a continuous deployment cycle, which is basically I'm constantly working on it, yet I'm releasing it, yet I'm learning, yet I'm constantly releasing. Um, are you? How many of you? All right, fine. You guys are not. You guys are a little shy. So here's my hypothesis, right? iPhone users versus Android users. If you look at what's happening today in the last 2 weeks, ever since iOS 26 got released, and I'm doing this because I have both iOS and Android. My iOS devices are on a daily basis buzzing with updates of apps, because you have suddenly have developers that are getting the new iOS. They're constantly working on their apps. They're constantly seeing how their apps are performing, what bugs they are getting, because you have certain devices that are already on the new iOS beta version, and they're constantly updating it, versus the Android side of it, where Android apps are generally slower in terms of moving, in terms of updating, in terms of, right? So If there's a technical person here, I'd love to understand why that happens, but just something that I noticed. So there is a constant or a continuous deployment that's happening with iOS apps, and their constant updating that's going on. What you need to be careful about, and a word of caution is, you should go only as fast as you can learn. So if you're a small team, let's say if you're a very, very early stage startup, 3, 4 people, all techie people, go only as fast as you guys can manage it. So you will have to create the differentiation between 4 people, say 2 people are constantly looking at what feedback we're getting, what's the performance of, let's say, the app on a device, and 2 people are constantly looking at the hypothesis that you had in the business plan or the business model, and constantly improving on it based on what you are seeing on the ground. So creating a simple chart which essentially talks about, let's say, the backlog, something that's in progress and something that is done, and then having and splitting your tasks between that, is again a key factor on really, really refining your business model canvas and ensuring that you're using that optimally. So when you validate qualitatively, you need to verify that quantitatively. What I mean is, when you validate something based on the quality of input that you're getting, you verify it by saying, okay, if I have changed this feature, added more quality, has does that mean that it's giving rise to more people using it now? So am I getting more quantity now? And that's how you kind of do your analysis based on, is this feature for this market, for this customer segment? If I tweak this feature a little bit, make it more refined, does it mean that I suddenly have access to a lot more markets and a lot more customers? Does that translate directly into that? So you validate qualitatively, but you verify quantitatively, right? Same thing as I mentioned before. So the ideal conversion dashboard is part analytics and part customer relationship management. And this is very, very important. Yes, analytics is good. Yes, seeing what customers are doing with your product, what how they are using it is good. But are you listening to them? When you talk about customer relationship management, I'm also talking about a new team called customer success. Do you go talk to your customers and ask them, hey, you're using my product, is there something that you wished we had? Is it too simple to use? Is it too difficult to use? Can we add more features? And that's how you're getting this information from these people. So you're prioritizing, saying, okay, I have 10 customers, 7 of them say they want this feature, which we don't have. That should be our number one priority, because if we get that, not only do we keep these 7 people, but we also attract more customers like these 7 people onto our fold, because these guys want this kind of a feature. So it's part analytics, yes, looking at what's happening, how it's performing, but it's also part customer relationship management. So keep that in mind for the right correlation between your initial market analysis and your business model, and you're refining your business model as you move along. And then constantly keep testing your model, right? So if you remember this chart, over time, you are constantly testing it. You're constantly saying, okay, now these 2 columns are green. Now let me test the third column, which is the current one in red. Okay, this model doesn't work. These two options work. Now these columns are green. Let's test this model, which is red in color. This doesn't work. Now we have something which is completely green, which means in the business model canvas, you have found the right revenue channel, you have found your cost structure, you have found your revenue model, you found the right problems, you found the solutions, you have found the right customer segment, you have found your ideal thing. This model constantly evolves. It doesn't matter which company you are, it doesn't matter at what stage you are at. Typically, this model will be constantly evolving over time. You will find plenty of examples of companies, Korean or otherwise, who have either been so adamant on sticking to one model, which is just the first column, the first four, right? They've forgotten to evolve it, they've forgotten to test more models, and they no longer exist, right? There are plenty of companies we've learned in business school. If you are an MBA guy, you would have learned about Kodak, you would have learned about BlackBerry, you would have, which is RIM, you would have learned about these multiple examples of companies that failed to innovate, that failed to change with time, that failed to test their model out to new customer bases, new time, and they just were left behind, right? So this is very, very critical. And this is a great start of this is when you first launch your product. So as you launch your product, as you keep adding features, you will see that this business model keeps evolving over time until you find the right business model for your product in that specific time frame, which means this is my build 4.0. This build 4.0 is completely optimized for this product segment for this. Unless I build a completely new product, add multiples of features, I am absolutely certain my business model is in sync. That's the space that we're talking at. So let's go back to the business model that we spoke about a while ago. And let's break it down a little bit in terms of what we were talking, right? So if you remember, I spoke to you about the problems. So the top three problem statements that you're trying to solve, the solutions, the top three solutions mapped to this problem statement. So if you write a problem statement, you need to have a corresponding solution mapped to it, not just any random solution. Please be very careful. The key matrices, which means the activities that drive acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. What are those key matrices that you plan to have for the product? The cost structure. What is your customer acquisition looking like? What is your development cost looking like? What's the infrastructure you need? What's the distribution, marketing, sales, etc.? What is that cost? Put that in over there. Come to the USP side of it. What's that single, clear, compelling message that states why you are different and worth buying, right? Um, Oftentimes, when you meet certain VCs, if you haven't met, you will run across this problem. The VCs will ask you to explain your business in one sentence, right? What do you do? That's your USP. So you need to come up with a very clear, compelling message of why you're different and worth buying. What you're doing, why you're different, and why you're worth buying, right? So you then come to something called the unfair advantage. What is it that you have that can't be easily bought or copied? Now, if you are a deep tech company, do you have certain IPs? Now, remember, on the point of IPs, um, software IPs, or if you think that I have an IP in this software, doesn't really mean anything. It's not worth anything. It's not going to add value to your valuation. It's just a feel good factor that you have for yourself. The only IPs that matter are the hardware IPs that you may have, which means tangible IPs. Have you created a product which nobody else has created before? Does it have a system architecture that nobody has before? And so on and so forth, right? So software IPs don't make any sense. Hardware IPs do, right? So please keep that in mind. So if there's an unfair advantage, you need to put that here, saying I have the IP on this specific architecture which no one else can copy. You then talk about channels. What is going to be your path to your customers? Write down that path. Talk about how you plan to go there, and that path to customers should directly correlate to your cost structure where we talk about customer acquisition, right? So please bear in mind they all need to talk to each other. You then say customer segments. So what are your target cohorts? Be as specific as possible. There is a very interesting topic called customer persona. If you do not know what a customer persona is, I would highly recommend you go and learn about customer persona. Create those customer personas. Create that as crisp and as concise as you possibly can. This will really help you derive your correct customer segments. And then at the end, you come to revenue streams, which is whether you're going to be a SaaS product, whether you're going to be a transaction product, Lift, how are you going to have cross sells or upsells? Are you going to have tiers in terms of product pricing? Is it going to be part of any ecosystem, or is it going to be a standalone product, right? How do you plan to create multiple revenue streams based on your product? And can you create multiple revenue streams? Because again, the biggest risk of having a SaaS product is that you give the customer 12 chances every year to cancel your product. And each time a customer cancels your product means you need to spend more money on acquiring new customers to meet the deficit, right? So please write this down before you move around, before you go around launching the product. Keep refining this business model. It actually works. That is it. That brings me to the end of this session. It was supposed to be a reasonably short session, and we are literally 5 minutes from time. Again, I'm open. We have 5 minutes. I'm open to questions that you may have. I will try and answer them as best as I can.